Welcome to the To Be Frank Show with Zacc and Strack. Frank Zaccanelli has been in the world of domestic and international business and professional sports for 40 years. And as a former minority owner, president, and general manager of the Dallas Mavericks, he's been asked to comment on current events and national news for most of his professional career. Sarah Strackhouse has worked as a reporter, videographer, graphic designer, anchor, and producer at Fox News, CW, CBS, NBC, and Time Warner cable stations across the country for more than 12 years. And no matter where she landed, her search was for the truth. In a time where journalistic integrity has come to be questioned, people are looking for a place to find just the facts.
Welcome to the To Be Frank Show, the Thursday edition. I'm Frank Zaccanelli, and I'm with my host, Sarah Strackhouse. And we're really excited about doing the show today, man. There was a busy night and morning, Sarah, of things. And what it's done for the show today is, as most of you realize, you know, it takes a lot of time to kind of plan these shows. So Sarah, our producer Holden, and I spent a lot of time really thinking about all this. But based on last night and especially this morning, Sarah, we made a little bit of a change to the show. My Unplugged section today was going to be about the national debt. And I'm going to talk about that. But we're going to really convert into now these spending bills. You know, today, in my opinion, was the lowest point in the Biden administration. I'm not happy to have to say that. Again, we are not a political show. We are not a show driven by ideology. Anybody who's watched us for 2 years knows that. But if you're a new viewer, you know, that's not our intent. It's not what we're here to do. But the news drives us.
Yep.
I'd like to say in the news business that reporters, Sarah, should be calling balls and strikes.
Okay.
That's like an umpire. They should be calling balls and strikes. It's either a ball or it's a strike. And I believe that that's what they need to be doing instead of deciding what the pitch is before the pitcher throws the ball.
Right. No, I like that take. I've never heard that before, but I really like that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So what we're actually going to do today is we're going to really start out with the Unplugged section, but we're going to really have kind of an interview between Sarah and I. And what I'm going to attempt to do is to break down the current economic conditions, not only in the United States now, but with the Biden spending bills that, you know, I think some would say he was elected on in 2020. This show has taken a very hard line about we're not going to say that that election was anything except for legal. It was certified by the Congress, and he's the duly elected president. He has got more problems, though, as my father would say, in the old days, he's got more problems than Carter has liver pills. He used to explain everything kind of in that vernacular. Guess Carter had a lot of liver pills.
I guess so. Yeah, that's what that means.
For the older audience, they'll understand that. For the newer audience, these things are starting to pile up, Sarah, on his administration, and it's not a good look.
Well, in a lot of these instances, I think he's shooting himself in the foot, and he's making his own problems considerably worse. We've talked about this a number of times with the mandates, with the supply chain issues at the border, a lot of things that he's setting up for himself. And I think this morning's press conference and everything he's trying to do and the division in the Democratic Party, I think he is just continuing to make worse for himself.
And that's well said. You know, I had a problem during the Trump administration to show again that there's real balance in my mind. I'm an independent. I am not Republican. I am not a Democrat. But during the Trump administration, Sarah, and I know most of our viewers really now understand this, there was a big discussion about health care. And they had Donald Trump in the White House. They had the Senate. They had the House. And unfortunately, they couldn't do anything.
Yep.
It never got passed. That was when John McCain kind of did this and all of that. But they were never able to capitalize on their triple majority, if you want to call it that way. That's exactly what's happening here. But it's happening for different reasons.
Right.
And I'm going to get deep into what I believe those reasons are. all of it added up, though, it's not good for the country.
No, definitely not. And that's why, as Frank has said, we normally break down into some of the top live news subjects. Then we go into our back and forth segment of Double Take. And then he goes into his Unplugged. And then we end with headlines. We're switching that around just like a normal newscast. You know, we're dropping and moving things to the top that we feel like are most important. And Frank is so great to weigh in on this with, again, as you heard in the intro, more than 40 years experience in the business world. He understands the really difficult financial topics that I think a lot of people struggle with, and how the economy works in our country and how it directly relates to your pocketbook. So that's, I think, going to be really great to weigh in and for people to hear.
You know what, Sarah? That's well said, and thank you. Yeah. But the people that really don't understand it are the people that are reporting the news on CNN, on Fox, on MSNBC. You take them all, Newsmax. They don't understand these topics. And so they dance around these things and they turn them into political garbage, really.
Yeah.
You know, I have to say, today's CNN coverage, I watch both, was better than the Fox coverage today, because John King, who's their political guy, actually had a roundtable and they were talking about specific issues. You go to Fox in this Outnumbered program, they're talking about, you know,
ICE right now.
Everything except for this. And again, it's my contention that today was the worst day, and there have been a lot of bad days, but the worst day of the Biden presidency, because the Speaker of the House went out in public and said to her Democrats, please don't embarrass the president. It's really kind of what happened here because of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and we're going to get into breaking all that down. So let's kind of get started with this. Sarah's going to ask me some questions, and we're going to tie it together. But this morning I woke up, and the economic growth of the country, the GDP, basically came in and was very, very disappointing. They were expecting somewhere between 2.8% and 3% growth, and it came in at 2% flat.
And for those people who don't understand what the GDP represents, what it means.
It's goods and services that are produced inside our country, basically. So it's all the goods and services. It's the economic development and process of our country. And it's calculated on a quarterly basis, and it's calculated inside these numbers.
And it can usually give a good indication of where the economy lies.
Well, clearly, but in today's report, there's no question that the issue that we've been covering for so long, this supply chain issue, is definitely playing a role in all of this.
Right.
The stock market, these people are on something, because, you know, there's a lot of earnings that are still coming in good, but I have to tell you, these economic things that we're talking about, Sarah, have a tendency to lag. And sooner or later, it is my opinion that it's not reflected in this stock market growth. And I think that's going to come. And I'm afraid that when it does come, it's going to come hard. And that's what concerns me about our economy, and it concerns me about the average person, because as we talked about before, everybody now has a 401k.
Right.
Everybody kind of pays attention to what the stock market's doing. As you know, 20 years ago, that wasn't the case.
Right. So President Biden spoke to the American people today about his social spending bill, trying to get that passed. But people really need to know that there's two parts to his economic agenda. The first part is that infrastructure bill, and the second part is that Build Back Better plan that has the social spending bill attached to it. But first, I really feel like we need to break down that infrastructure bill, what it means, where it is right now, and why it's being stalled.
Okay. So the infrastructure bill itself is $1 billion bipartisan bill that's been passed since August. And it's been sitting on the Senate's desk because it's awaiting passage by the House of Representatives. The House has made a decision not to pass it until step 2 of the economic plan is agreed to and done, which is this Build Back Better plan, which is the social spending plan. So in theory, the House progressives are holding the infrastructure bill hostage until they get what they want in this social spending package. Let me cover, this is from CNN, let me cover the basics of the infrastructure plan. This is something that I'm not like totally against at all. It's for airports and roads and different things. The numbers don't add up, and it adds hundreds of billions of dollars to the deficit, no matter what anyone tells you. But it is a plan that does create jobs and does fix certain infrastructure things and is probably long overdue. Trump was talking about this back in his presidency. So the $1 billion bill, it's a massive infrastructure bill of about $1 trillion. The deal includes $550 billion in new federal investments and American infrastructure over the next 5 years. Now that 550, I've actually come up with a higher number, and I'm going to break it down for everybody. But it's a significant amount of money that is going to repair infrastructure needs in the country and is going to create some jobs. Part of the problem with any spending bill is you have to figure out how you're going to pay for it. That's where the details of this get completely sketchy across the board. But the package, according to the CBO, that's the Congressional Budget Office, that's where I get most of my information on these things. It says that it would add anywhere between this $1 trillion bill, between $256 billion and $350 billion to the federal deficit over the next 10 years. Okay? So that's the kind of spending side. The bill has not been approved by the House, as I mentioned. It's being held hostage to a bunch of progressives and Bernie Sanders in the Senate for basically trying to get what they want on this social spending bill. Biden in March on this bill wanted $2.25 billion worth of stuff in this bill, and they've agreed to just a little less than $1 trillion. So they have come down. We'll talk about this kind of come down again and what it really means. But they have come down from his initial in March numbers. Funding for roads, bridges, major infrastructure projects, $110 billion. Okay? Roads, infrastructure, bridges, things that need repair, need replacement, $110 billion of the $1 trillion bill. $40 billion on bridge repair and emplacement and rehabilitation, $40 billion. $16 billion for other major projects, transportation safety, $1 billion to recommit communities that have been cut off by either freeways that have been built through their communities or whatever. $39 billion to modernize public transportation. That's buses, that is trains, and there's another piece in this for the trains. You know, for me, I think train service in the United States is not very good, especially where I live here in Dallas. You go to Europe, you go most of the places around the world, Japan, you go to China, the train service is phenomenal. We don't have good train service here, and part of that reason is that the airlines have blocked it. They don't want the competition, and their lobby is that strong in Washington. $66 billion additional for passenger and freight rail. All these things, again, add to the kind of infrastructure of the country. $65 billion for broadband infrastructure. I'm big for this. There are so many rural areas that are not equipped to be able to deal in the 21st century in 2021. And there are also a lot of communities in the inner cities that are not set up to do that. The $65 billion, I think, is probably money well spent to be able to try to figure out how to improve the infrastructure. $17 billion, we've heard a lot about this, for port infrastructure, okay? This is, again, part of the problems that we're having at Long Beach, part of the problems we're having at the Port of LA and ports around the country. You know, this would improve the port infrastructure. $25 billion for airports. We go through certain airports around the country. A lot of them are redone and some of them are not really redone. I mean, LaGuardia used to be the biggest eyesore in the history of eyesores. They've been working on that now for the last 4 or 5 years, but there are other airports that are out there that need improvement. $65 billion for the electric grid. So improving our electric grid, which I'm all for, if you lived here in Texas, during the electric grid meltdown in February, you would too realize that, our electric grids are getting old and there's some things that we have to do. Yes. And $21 billion of environmental remediation for brownfield and the Superfund. And I've dealt in that in my development career. And some of that is money well spent. So when you add up all the categories, and I didn't name everyone, I get the $687 billion. Now they're calling this a $1 trillion package, which leads me to believe there's a bunch of hidden stuff in there in every one of these bills. There was discussion about that Nancy Pelosi had $20 million in there for a park in her district. I mean, all this stuff. I don't have all the fine details, but that gives you the broad base, bipartisan, approved in the Senate infrastructure package.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's so interesting. And the fact that there's all of those little pieces in there that we're not finding. I was looking as you were kind of going down your numbers and how it was all adding up, and I was like, how are they getting to 3.5 trillion?
No, but this is only $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Remember,
okay, $1 trillion. Yeah. But there's still stuff missing, that means.
Yeah, no. But it's $1 trillion here and then 3.5 trillion over here.
Yeah.
See, the average person has combined those.
Right.
So it's $1 trillion on the infrastructure bill, and then an additional 3.5 trillion on the social spending bill, which makes 4.5 trillion.
So let's get into the social spending bill. So that's what he was trying to push through and trying to talk about this morning, which includes aspects of senior care, preschooling, child tax credit, healthcare, and climate change provisions. But my question is, how's this going to be paid for? Because he talked about how federal taxes will not go up for families who are making less than $400,000 a year. And he said he's going to tax the people who are making the billions. But tell us how everything's going to be funded and what this means for the American people if those taxes are going to be on the people who are making billions.
Well, that's a great question, Sarah, because no one in this United States of America and our whole country knows how it's going to be paid for. President Biden came out today and said it's all paid for, but he doesn't give one detail about what that means, okay? And we're now on the $3.5 trillion bill. They're now talking about, maybe it's $1.9 trillion. What I tried to do on a prior show in my Unplugged is explain how much money $3.5 trillion is. Let me explain it. If you built a 35-foot building from one end zone to the other, the length and width of a full football field, 35-story, which is a 3-story building, and you filled it with $100 bills, that's how much space it would take to hold that much money.
A 3-story building.
A 35-foot building, wow, the size and width of a football field.
That's crazy.
This is enormous amounts of money. Here's the problem with all of these spending bills. Nobody can tell you how they're going to be paid for. Today, he mentioned a couple of things. We're going to put a 15% tax on corporations, okay? Now, the devil's in the details. What does that mean? How is that done, okay? I think corporations should pay their fair share. There's so much talk about corporations have not paid their fair share. They should pay their fair share, okay? Then he's talking about taxing the billionaires. There's about 700 of them. You could take all their money, okay? And you're not even going to put a dent into this. Mm-hmm. So I don't really understand what any of that means. And unfortunately, neither does anybody else. But when the president comes out and he says this plan is already paid for, people just kind of stare up at the ceiling and they're saying, how does that work?
How is that possible? In my head, I'm hearing the spending is going to come from the corporations, or the money's going to come from the corporations. But then in my head, I'm thinking, okay, well, that's going to still trickle back down to the consumer, to the middle class, to the people who are going out and buying what's on the shelves, because they're just going to hike up prices to pay for that tax, or they're going to get around the tax to begin with because they have great CPAs in their pockets. But I think that they're probably going to come back and it's going to end up being the middle class, the consumers, the lower class, who are still going to end up paying for that.
All right, but this is the point that I want to make on this, and I'm going to go through a bunch of statistics. Our country is technically broke, Okay, we don't have any more money. We're borrowing all this money. We run deficits, Sarah, on a yearly basis of about $1 trillion. Now, what does that mean? Well, in your own households, what it means is that you make $10,000 a month and you spend $20,000 a month. Okay? It's not sustainable in your household unless you have an uncle or a brother or a brother-in-law who's a banker that just keeps loaning you money because you can't sustain the deficit spending. Our country can't sustain it. Our national debt is $29 trillion. Now think about that. That would be football fields, just start naming some. Giant Stadium, Cowboy Stadium, the new stadium in Vegas, the new stadium in Los Angeles, and add about 4 more.
So where are we getting all the money from?
We're borrowing the money. We're printing the money, okay? We don't have, when you don't have revenues that equal your spending, you're now deficit spending. Think about it in your own household.
Right.
Okay, so everybody's talking about, $3.5 trillion. Well, that's a lot of money. Well, we'll probably go to 1.9 trillion. We don't have 3.5 trillion. We don't have 1.9 trillion. We don't have $1 trillion. We don't have 100 million, billion, call it what you want. We don't have $5 of extra money. We don't.
Yeah.
And here's a big problem. The World Bank has set standards in terms of the GDP. Now, remember, we get back to this GDP again, products and services, the growth of our country, to the national debt. And everyone has agreed that 76, 77, 78% is about as high as you want to go. GDP to national debt, the ratio.
Okay.
Today, it's 125%. There's not a banker that is an independent banker that would make that bet in anyone's life. That's a big statistic.
Yeah.
That is a really significant statistic, is that we are so over leveraged. It'd be like, you own a car and you got a note. You own a boat and you got a note. You got a mortgage payment. You got a TV payment. You got this payment. And then you go and you want to buy something else and the banker says, I can't loan you that money.
Or I don't trust you're going to pay it back.
But nobody stops any of these people in Washington because we owe 29 trillion. So let's get down to the 29 trillion. It is my contention. And anybody that wants to argue this with me, come on the show and I'll have you running off the show in less than 5 minutes, okay? You can't pay it back. It's not that you're ever going to pay it back.
Yeah.
You're not going to pay it back. We can't even get to a balanced budget. The last time, Sarah, that we had a balanced budget was under a few of the years of Bill Clinton. That's the last time we had a balanced budget.
So since then, we've run up $29 trillion.
Along the way. Right.
Wow.
This started in 1945.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is when it came down to the GDP, we had a growing economy. The economy still grows, but it's not growing at a level that could substantiate this. And all the Democrats want to do now is spend more money. Money we don't have. And this is what Joe Biden believes and said today he was elected on. I believe, duly elected, I believe he was elected not a vote for him, but a vote against Donald Trump. That's what I believe. And because, let's be honest. Was the Biden administration really vetted? Were they really vetted? Did anyone really, really understand all of these things before you went into the polling booth? Not really.
Probably not.
He didn't do much in terms of interviews. The national press, shame on all of you, because you allowed this. You allow for the, the press is there. This is what I believe since I've been small, and you really have been in the press.
Yeah.
You're there to keep the politicians honest.
Yep.
Did they really do that?
To report the truth. No.
Did they really do it?
They did to Trump.
Okay, but
not to
what
Biden.
I'm saying is we got to have a balanced scale here. So this spending bill, this Build Back Better bill, leave the infrastructure bill over here. And let me say again, they're holding up this semi-make-sense bill that is bipartisan because they're holding it hostage to this social program spend a ton of money that we don't have. Now, anyone who's listened to me and anyone who knows me knows I am for social programs that make sense for people that need the help. But this thing goes so far beyond.
Yeah.
And you know something? You know, I've had people in my business career tell me all the time, you know, do good so you can do good for others. Mm-hmm. We're not doing good at our country, which means we don't have any money to
do good for others.
No.
Yeah.
No. So, as I've mentioned, you know, they're now talking about a $1.9 trillion bill down from 3.5. And they're making like, oh, look at what we've done. Do you know how much money that is?
Right.
Well, let me give you a clue. Based on the $29 trillion of national debt, we have to pay interest on that debt. Now, right now, interest rates, which they've been for a long time, Sarah, are compressed down. Now, this goes back to the average viewer, again, thinking about this. Your credit cards and your mortgages, the lower the amount of interest, the more you can afford to pay, right? I mean, it's common sense, right?
You can pay it off easier, quicker.
Yes. So interest, you know, causes you to have to pay more money.
Right.
In today's world, when you look at the treasury bills, you know, people buy them all the time. I bought them my whole career. You know, you've got 2-year, you got 5-year, you got 10-year, you got 30-year. You look at the yields on those. People complain all the time. Well, I got my money in the bank and I'm not getting any return. Well, the reason you're not is interest rates are dramatically low. They're traditionally low. They're low in history, okay? So let's just assume that the interest on this debt is about 2% overall. And it's hard to calculate because there's so many different categories. We're paying between $300 and $400 billion a year in interest on all this money. That's coming right off the top of all the receipts that are collected. And so if we're running $1 trillion deficit per year, which has been way more than that now with this COVID spending, I'm just trying to get down to the basics because the actual story's worse than this the last 2 years because of the CARES Act and all this other money that we spent, okay? But getting down to the operational capability of the United States, 30% of our deficit is interest on the money that we borrowed. And that is being artificially suppressed because of these low interest rates. If interest rates went from 2% to 4%, our financial structure is going to blow up.
Well, and that essentially means that we're never going to get dug out. So if this does pass, what does that mean for the American people?
Well, I think for some of the socialist-minded people in this country, it means that Biden's done a good job. For the people that don't believe in that, I think they feel like we've just now put the ship into the iceberg again.
Right.
And there's not many more times you're going to be able to hit the iceberg. What it means is that we're in a financial situation with debt in this country that we cannot pay back. I'm not making that up.
Yeah.
We can't pay it back. We can't even get to a balanced budget for 1 year.
So are we held hostage now to other countries?
Well, there are portions of our debt that are owned by countries like China and Japan. I'm not so much worried about that.
Okay.
Okay? But that's a low percentage of the $29 trillion.
Right.
The majority is we owe ourselves. And what you end up doing is when you print money, okay, then what happens to the value of the dollar?
It goes down.
Remember, in 1971, Richard Nixon went off the gold standard. And so then it really got out of control.
Right.
Because we really had no standard about what's backing the dollar. So we said, okay, what's going to back the dollar is going to be the gross domestic product, the growth of our country. Well, what I'm explaining to everyone is the World Bank, which is an authority on these types of things, has published many times that the situation as it relates to the ratio between the GDP and the national debt at 75, 78%, you're starting to hit the top levels. We're at 125% today.
Wow.
It's not sustainable.
Nope.
And we continue to go out and borrow money. And people in Washington, they're not spending their own money. And the problem is, I would bet you that a vast majority of the people, can I ask you a question? You watch a lot of news. You're a newswoman.
I do.
When was the last time you heard anybody talk about the national debt?
I mean, our show. You've talked about it, but I just.
Anybody?
I mean, not recently.
Any reporter, going to Biden or going to Schumer or going to, for that matter, Trump or anybody else. How are you going to pay this debt back?
Right.
Now.
The last time I probably heard it talked about was with Trump.
But the games that they play, like today, this is all paid for, but they don't tell you how it's paid for.
Right.
They give you categories.
Yeah.
Okay? But let me just tell you, they told us things are paid for before, but the debt goes up at least $1 trillion. But during COVID again, I don't even want to tell you, we have borrowed probably $5 trillion on some of these other programs, and we can't pay it back.
Right.
We can't pay it back. There's a few more statistics that I want to hit. The billionaire tax, they're talking about, and the 15% minimum corporate tax. I'm for corporations paying their fair share. I'm for billionaires paying their fair share. I'm for everybody paying their fair share. The problem is that when you take a look at the billionaire tax, this has all been projected now. It's in, and this information's out there. You can go get it. I get it from everywhere. The stuff that I gave you on the infrastructure came out of CNN. So I try to use everybody. But on this stuff, the Democrats hope to generate from the billionaire tax about $200 billion over 10 years. That's about $20 billion a year. That doesn't even come close to paying for anything.
Right.
I mean, because when you add now this additional monies, okay, say it's going to be $2 trillion and then $1 trillion on the infrastructure package. So say it's $3 trillion total. People are saying it's more. It's $3 trillion total. The interest on that alone is astronomical. And then you're running deficits, so you don't have money. Again, in your own household, when your husband gets a bonus, you pay bills off, right?
Right.
And then maybe you go buy something. Maybe you go on a vacation. You have extra money.
Yep.
We don't have any money.
Yeah. So then my question is, what about the 15% corporation tax? How much would that generate?
Well, I don't know, because there really hasn't been any analysis based on that yet in terms of what they think they're going to be able to do with these corporations.
That's a huge amount that they'll have to make up. If it's only generating $200 billion over 10 years, that doesn't come close to the $3 trillion. That's
right. But don't forget, the $3 trillion is going to be added to $29 trillion.
Yeah.
It'd be like, you got a mortgage and you got a car and you've got this and you've got that. I just don't know how you do it. Well, I'm going to give you 4 ways that it could be done, and none of them are good. First of all, you can cut spending. All right? You want to get rid of these deficits and you want to try to pay this debt down, you got to drastically cut spending. We're going in the opposite direction. Okay? We are. And Donald Trump, okay, when he was president, decided what he was going to do is have a tax cut that, in his opinion, brought more revenue in because it increased the velocity of the economy. Some of that worked.
Yeah.
At the time, some of that worked because our unemployment rate was the lowest on record. Receipts were growing. And everyone on the Democratic side who want to think like socialists, and I'm going to get to the Democratic Party in a second, a lot of their party now has become this progressive side. I think they mentioned today some 50 to 55 Democratic people in the House of Representatives are part of this kind of progressive movement led by AOC and Ilhan Omar, and led by Bernie Sanders, who is a confirmed socialist. He hates our system, okay? So we're fighting for the heart and soul of the country. And the people that are fighting for this are trying to be fiscally responsible. And I know for someone like me, I want people that need the help to get the help, but we got to do it properly.
Right.
And everything, it seems like, in the Joe Biden administration is political. Everything he's done at the border, everything he did at Afghanistan, everything is politically charted before he does it. The same thing with these spending bills. So you can cut spending. You can raise taxes. Now, if you took all the money from everybody, you'd have a hard time paying back all this stuff.
Right.
If you took everything. I mean, this is how far underwater we are. But you could raise taxes. You could grow the economy faster than the debt. What does that mean?
Yeah, how do you do that?
Well, it's going to be hard now because the debt is so substantial. You remember the statistic I just gave you, Sarah? I said that the ratio between the GDP and the amount of debt is at 125%, disastrous on the scale.
And it needs to be around 75 to 78.
How about 30 or 40? That's
Yeah.
how you would start to get into some surplus.
Okay.
But that means the economy would have to grow with these spending rates. I haven't calculated this, but it probably would have to grow at 7-8% a year. That's impossible.
Right.
You're not going to be able to do that to the world's largest economy. Or you could shift spending.
Okay.
Now, this is an interesting one. In today's world, it's not, in my opinion, a great idea. You could shift spending. Now, what does that mean?
Yeah.
We spend a ridiculous amount of money on our military. If you cut that budget drastically down, and you took that money and you applied it to other programs that created jobs and economic development, because the military really doesn't do that. It's there for our protection. If you shifted spending, it's the possibility you might be able to get in to saving some money.
And you're not suggesting pulling money from the military. That's just
I
the
am,
example.
I am not. I am trying to give an example
Yeah.
of that. I mentioned, again, the national debt. The interest on the national debt is somewhere between 300 and 400 billion a year. And that's at interest rates that are traditionally, historically, incredibly low.
Wow.
If those interest rates started to rise, you could have a major problem, an explosion. So I think it's projected. This is another one of my problems, and I'll get to a close here. It's projected that in 20 years, the Social Security Trust Fund is going to be insolvent, that you won't be able to make the payments necessary for all the people. Now, I'm of an age right now where I can collect Social Security. I don't yet. But I can collect it, okay? The Social Security Trust Fund is going to become insolvent for people like you, your children, Holden. They're going to have to address that.
Right.
I mean, they're going to have to address that. That is a whole nother spending deal.
Right.
That I don't know where the hell they're going to come up with the money.
Taking care of our elderly.
But my point of the matter is, the more of these spending bill social programs that you come up with, the less money you're going to have to be able to do the things like pay for Social Security and everything else. That's a big one.
Yeah.
That's a big, big one. So, Sarah, I don't know, I hope that answered the questions of our viewership out there. What I try to do on all these things is make it simple and relate it to your own personal life.
Right.
Because these things are very complicated, very complex issues. Today was, I believe, in my mind, Biden's worst day in his presidency. Because Nancy Pelosi went to these progressive Democrats and said, don't embarrass the president. And they said, not doing it. We're not going to agree. And so what's going to happen now is you're going to see a big flurry of, and on the news, unfortunately, everyone, you're just going to get the political view. You're not going to have people really asking real hard economic questions. Before you spend any money, don't you want to discuss the debt that you have existing already?
Absolutely.
That's just common sense. It happens in every single person's life, but our country doesn't deal like that. So it's a mess.
Yep.
And, do I feel bad for Biden? In a way, I do. I think he's a little lost now. This is the same thing, though, that Trump did around the healthcare thing. He had all the control, they had all these plans, and they don't get it done.
Right.
I don't understand how that happens.
Yeah.
Because I know in business, if I get a consensus, then I got to get the ball over the goal line. In Washington, sometimes things don't work that way.
Well, and it just kind of makes me think that exactly what you've talked about in previous shows, that this is what happens when you have career politicians who are sitting in the White House rather than business people, businessmen, businesswomen, people who work in businesses, growing their businesses, and are in touch with what the American people really want and need.
Well, there's a better shot of snow in Dallas, and it's not snowing here today.
No.
It's actually beautiful.
Yeah.
Than to have career politicians vote themselves out of office.
Yeah.
With some term limit deal. Again, the framers of the Constitution did not want this.
No.
I'm completely convinced. They wanted people to go to Washington, serve their country, and go back into their communities.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's get on with the rest of the show,
I
Sarah.
have one last question.
All right.
Do you think that they're going to be voted in?
What voted?
The infrastructure bill, the spending bill.
I think something's going to pass. I think the infrastructure package is going to pass at some point. They're holding it hostage now.
Right.
And I think that there'll be some social spending plan, because you start to see politicians that waffle and basically say, well, it was $3.5 trillion, so I did my job. I got it down to 1.9. They don't even know what these numbers mean.
Right.
They don't even know what they mean. So is something going to be passed? I would say yes. I would say you're going to be told, the American people are going to be told it's all paid for. It's not going to be all paid for. They're trying to figure all that out.
Yeah.
And so, but I think something will get done probably before Christmas.
All right. Well, we'll make sure to stay on that, because I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
All right. Time now for live news. So we're finding out more information about the shooting that happened on the setting of Rust. So in case you haven't been following this story, Alec Baldwin was handed a gun that he was told was, quote, cold, and he was showing the cinematographer how he was going to be pulling that gun. And unfortunately, the gun went off and did kill her. And we're finding out that Dave Halls, the one who handed over the gun, the crew member, according to investigators, quote, did not check all the rounds loaded in the weapon. That was according to CNN. He spoke to detectives, and that was what they were reporting to the news. He told Baldwin that it was cold. My question surrounds why was there any live ammo on the set at all? And I read in another article that apparently there were more than 500 rounds of ammo, whether it's dummy, blank, and live. And the live rounds look almost identical to the dummy rounds.
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of this from you. I was busy on a lot of this other stuff, but I got a lot of this from you today, that they were actually firing live rounds out of those guns the day that the accident happened.
Right. They were shooting at cans or shooting on the set. So it just, we've kind of continued to follow just with some updates on this story, but it is astounding to me.
Well, and going into our second story, which are really tied together, Sarah, why don't you set that up? Because I got really a lot to say about this one.
Yeah, so we actually have a photo that we can show, and we're going to leave that up kind of while we chat a little bit about it. So it's a shirt that was on Donald Trump Jr.'s website. It was, I guess, in a movement of pro-gun safety, pro-2A.
Right.
Guns don't kill people. Alec Baldwin kills people.
Yeah, I got a real problem with this one. Because I think this is so insensitive by a guy that's an intelligent guy. I think that there's an arrogance that's here that really makes me very angry about this, because this is grandstanding on somebody's misfortune. I'm going to contend that Alec Baldwin did not try to intentionally kill this person. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know about manslaughter laws and all that other stuff. But he didn't intentionally try to do this. Donald Trump Jr. should be ashamed of himself for, really exploiting this. That's really the word that comes to my mind. Yeah. Exploiting this for a guy that wasn't very friendly to his father and his family. Well, you know what? That's politics.
Right.
Over here, this is life and death.
Right.
I'll give you a quote, and this one really, really sums it up. This is from Donald Trump Jr. Screw all the people, if you will, that I'm seeing out there. If the shoe was on the other foot, Alec Baldwin would literally be the first person pissing on everyone's grave trying to make a point. F him. I put this in writing. And I think that that's just arrogant. I think it's terrible. Now let's turn to the political side, and you can speak to this. This is dumb politics. Here's a guy that might have a political future. I don't know. There's been talk about this. His father still thinks that he has a political future. This is not good for the Trumps.
I agree to a certain extent. I agree that it's disgusting what he's doing. He's making a profit off of a death. I don't think that should ever be done. But I do agree we saw a lot of nasty stuff happen while Trump was in presidency. We saw a lot of people capitalize on terrible things and try to make it political. So while I agree with the sentiment, he's saying that if the shoe was on the other foot, that Alec Baldwin would be the first to maybe talk about if this happened with Trump. Let's say Trump was doing some sort of an event and was given a cold round and ended up shooting someone. I do believe that everyone would be enraged at him, not at the situation. I do agree with that sentiment, but at the same time, the shirt is unnecessary. I think it's incredibly insensitive. He is exploiting this situation. And we talked last time, I talked about gun safety, about knowing if there's going to be an actual gun there and there's going to be actual live rounds. When you pick up that gun, you become the person in charge of that gun. Yeah. But again, this is extenuating circumstances. I agree with you. I do not believe that there was any intent to kill. I do not believe any criminal charges should be filed on Alec Baldwin.
I think rust production is a different matter.
Dave Hall's, yes.
I think that's a different matter, and they have to look at that.
Right.
Here's my problem with what you stated here, though. Two wrongs don't make a right.
Right.
And so my only position is think about the family of this young woman that lost her life, her children, her husband. It's just not cool. How about that?
No, I 100% agree with that. Helena Hutchins. I 100% agree. Two wrongs do not make a right. Like I said, while I do think if the shoe was on the other foot, something similar would be happening, but it doesn't make him right to say it. It doesn't make him right to be posting about it, to making a shirt off it, to making a profit of it. So I think the whole situation is ugly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep. All right, we are moving on to our next talk. We're talking Biden again. He released his gender equity plan. Can we roll the tape really quickly on this one first?
The president's plan for gender equity, that plan would actually eliminate cash bail. There's not a very good history of removing cash bail in New York City. Yeah. We live under constant threat because of it.
So here's what happens under no cash bail. You have a 37% rate of repeat crimes. So you let those people go. There's a 37% rate of repeat crimes. You also see that people don't show up for their court dates. So this is what we know. You have to look at the facts of how these programs actually work. Does it make the city safer?
So, kind of like they're talking about, the plan to promote gender equity includes a proposal to eliminate cash bail for suspects. So, as they were talking about, Biden's thoughts is that this makes it tougher for minority families to use cash to get out of jail. So, they're stuck in jail basically longer. But cities that have eliminated cash bail show the likelihood of a rearrest before trial rose 37% in those locations.
Stole my line. She stole my line, ladies and gentlemen. That was going to be my big lead-in.
Right? Well, I mean, those are statistics. They're out there. Clearly, if you and I found them from different places, those are the statistics.
This doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
I'm sensitive to the minority community. I'm very sensitive to the police. I think they have to work in tandem. I don't even know what this means.
Oh, well, I don't know why it's included.
I don't even know what it means. And I don't know why an administration would continue to do things like this when their whole agenda is I mean, is there any other way to say it, in jeopardy? I mean, I'm trying to be, again, non-political here, but I mean,
there
it's a mess.
There are so many other priorities that they should be focusing on.
And I just don't understand why. This is another one that they've promised to somebody that they just kind of roll out there that the average American, I think, scratches his head on.
Well, and I completely agree. I think they're trying to push things that they've promised, meanwhile trying to ignore some of the issues that they have made themselves, which brings us to our next story. We're not letting Afghanistan die.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
We're not.
So
We're not.
We are not, yes. So the Pentagon said Tuesday nearly 450 American citizens are still in Afghanistan.
All right, here we go. Starts out at 100, gets to 200 maybe, 363. Now it's 450 coming out of the Pentagon. These are different than the State Department. Mm-hmm. The problem is, guys, we don't know. I get back to the same thing. We don't know. We know there are a lot of people there.
Yep.
But we don't know. Should we know? Of course we should know.
And we shouldn't have pulled out our last troops until we had all the Americans
there. Of course,
there.
all the basic stuff. Yeah. But, you know, the reason that we cover this is all in the news. I mean, 450 now Americans that they've identified. This is the Pentagon now.
Yep.
This isn't the State Department talking that came up with the 363 number. So this just adds to the mess. Again, anybody who thinks on the Republican side that they want to throw a party, Biden's administration's in a meltdown, this is great. It's terrible for our country.
Right.
None of this is good.
Right.
Okay? You're going to have a good chance to go to the polls on both sides in 2022 to vote for, the House and Senate. You're going to have a great opportunity in 2024 to go vote in the next presidential election. But none of this is good. This is really bad stuff.
And we're focusing on the wrong thing. The fact that he's talking about cash bailouts when we still are leaving Americans and American allies, and that number is just American citizens, not even American allies.
Oh, I know.
When we're talking about all of this other stuff that in reality does not matter compared to pulling the people back home.
That's right.
Is absurd.
All right, so the last one in this segment is the social media in front of Congress. I read a little bit about it. You start out on it.
All right, so last week, the whistleblower went in front of Congress talking about
New whistleblower now.
New whistleblower, yes.
There's multiple whistleblowers.
Multiple people are coming out about how Facebook and social media knows that they're harming children, especially young girls who are struggling with body image. They mislead the public, and they have a role in spreading, quote, extreme and divisive subjects.
All right, so let me just make a point here. Mm-hmm. We are not Facebook bashers on the show because it's our main vehicle to be able to get our show out by a long shot.
Yes.
Okay? But the social media things that we're talking about are universal across the social media spectrum.
Yeah.
Facebook, because they're the biggest player, has a tendency to get picked on a little bit more. That's how it works.
No, yeah, exactly. Well, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok, and Facebook and Instagram went before Congress on Tuesday and were kind of grilled about a lot of their questions. Basically, legislators are trying to draft a law prohibiting child advertising and legislation for regulations for online federal privacy standards, which would essentially get around the social media liability protections that they have in place, saying that you are going to be held liable for advertising that negatively impacts children and gets them home.
All right, let's talk about something that we took out of the show, and I'll bring it up to you. In your opinion, because you know a lot more about social media than I do, what is the age that a child should be allowed by their parents to go on social media?
This is going to be a really unpopular one, but I don't think they should be on there till at least high school.
Well, good luck on that one.
I know. And I know that, middle schoolers are on Snapchat now, and it's supposed to be much safer because you can turn your locations off, but I grew up in a time, and as did you,
I'm a dinosaur. No.
Well,
I didn't have cell phones.
Right. Well, I didn't get my first cell phone until much later as well. But I mean, and it didn't have social media. It was one of those brick Nokias that I could play Snake and send one text a month, right? But we had AIM, so AOL Instant Messenger, and even on that, I was only allowed on only for an hour after school, and I had to get all my homework done.
Well, your mother's strict.
Oh, they were strict. No TV during the week. But you know what? These are things that I want to implement for my kids too. So we were allowed on for an hour, and we had to get all of our schoolwork done within that hour. So if we needed to be online for anything, that was included.
Yeah.
But the amount of stuff, just the amount of chit-chat back and forth with friends and drama and all this stuff that occurred in that 1 hour was enough to feed for, a month. And I just don't think it's just another way for people to bully. It's another way to feel insecure. It's another way for people to get under each other's skin, for rumors to spread. I don't think it's healthy for these young kids.
Well, I think it overtakes their lives,
Yeah.
and that's a big problem. My kids are grown. I got grandkids, and I know that they're going to be monitored by, their parents. I'll tell you just an interesting little anecdote. We go on to Double Take. I was at a dinner about 6 months ago, and next to me was a table of 8 people where you had the parents, you had probably 2 of their own kids, and then some other kids. The kids never talked to each other. They were texting each other when they were sitting at the same table.
Yep. I saw the same
Now, see,
thing.
I can't allow that.
No,
that to me, that's over the top.
I agree. My husband and I were sitting the other day, and there were the same thing. I think it was parents and 2 young girls. They looked about the same age, might have been a friend. They both had headphones in and were sitting on their phones the whole time.
No. For me, no.
Not maybe we're old school, but me too.
For me, no. All right, let's go to Double Take. All right, the first story on Double Take, and we're going to get through Double Take because this show has gone, pretty long. Enes Kanter, who is an NBA player, plays for the Celtics now, but he's played for multiple teams, has really come out now on Nike. He's come out on China. I've had a lot of experience in every one of these levels, and I could go on for a whole show on this, but I'm going to condense it down to 30 seconds. First of all, China and their manufacturing practices are atrocious. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the NBA, which of course I was a part of for almost 5 years, is really, really buddying up with China in a way that, quite frankly, I understand economically, but I don't understand if you stand for civil rights or you stand for the rights of people. Just remember a quote by the great Dr. Martin Luther King: "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." I mean, that is completely what we're talking about here. And LeBron James and all these other players that are out there that want social justice, well, we can't just limit it to African Americans in the United States. We have to look at this on a world scale.
Especially if you're using products from overseas.
Right. And so
endorsing products.
And Nike can't seem to come up with the data that shows that they're not using this slave labor, which they're being accused of by Enes Kanter.
Right.
And again, I could go on with this for a whole show, but we'll cover this again. But I applaud Enes Kanter.
I agree.
For basically calling out. And he's a Muslim, and he says that Muslims are treated terribly, in China. Well, if they were treated terribly in the United States, there would be a whole uproar on it, as there should be. But, we can't let it go on in a place that we're doing business.
Yeah, I loved a quote that he put on social media. He said, quote, "You do not address police brutality in China. You do not speak about discrimination against the LGBT community. You do not say a word about the oppression of minorities in China. You are scared to speak up."
Yeah.
He was saying that to Nike, and I thought that was a really good quote. So.
All right, so we'll cover this one again. All right, Sarah, the next one is
Biden joking that his job is to avoid media. He was talking on Monday to a bunch of elementary students in New Jersey, and he was essentially saying that the media gets to ask you all sorts of questions, and you try to find out how you're going to, quote, avoid answering them sometimes.
Can I tell you what? He's doing a great job of that.
I agree. Even this morning when he was speaking.
He's doing a great job of it.
So many people, and I think I just hit my mic, sorry. So many people were just constantly asking him questions right afterwards. How does Cinema feel about this? How does Manchin feel about this? And he just walked away, no questions answered.
I wouldn't say that to a bunch of elementary students.
No.
If I'm the president. I just don't think I would say that. We're not going to harp on this one. We got bigger problems in the world. But, I don't think I would say that.
I wouldn't say that, but it rings true.
All right.
All right, so another story we're looking at, stress from COVID-19 is affecting decision-making, especially in millennials. And I saw a statistic that...
I can't make a decision.
No, right? I know.
No, I can make a decision.
Well, and I read something that cigarette purchases went up for the first time in 20 years.
People are nervous.
It has to do with stress, right?
Yeah.
I mean...
Look, the bottom line is COVID's not been good for anybody. get back to COVID for a second. That's where I think we should be spending a lot of our time, is figuring out how it happened, why it happened, to make sure it never happens again. The effect that it's had, not only on Americans, but in the world population, I don't think there's any way to really gauge the complete destruction of this for years to come.
No, I don't think so. People are going to look back and think about how we think about the Spanish influenza.
Yeah.
So,
well, we lived it.
Yep.
All right. So let's go to your headlines.
All right. All right, well, we talked about some crazy weather along the West Coast on Monday, but we are also seeing the East Coast be shot down with more weather. So 600,000 people are without power today after a nor'easter hit the Northeast. New York and Massachusetts especially were hit. USA Today reports a bomb cyclone brought in hurricane-like wind and heavy rain. And as we explained Monday, bombogenesis is, quote, when the central pressure of a storm drops by 0.71 of an inch of mercury or more over a 24-hour period, becomes a bomb cyclone. And President Biden headed to Capitol Hill today to talk about the $1.75 trillion social and climate spending package with House Democrats. After his meeting, he talked about the new framework deal, which includes subjects of senior care, preschool, child tax credit, healthcare, and climate change provisions. For all of those details, please make sure to watch our Unplugged, because it has all of that. Frank breaks it down for you. Soon after, he left for Europe for the Group of 20 summit in Rome and then the UN Climate Summit in Scotland. Meanwhile, Pelosi calling for votes on social welfare legislation and the infrastructure bill ASAP. And we're learning more about the deadly shooting and the deadly accident on the set of Rust this month. Background, actor Alec Baldwin was handed a gun by a crew member he was told was cold, but as he was showing cinematographer Helena Hutchins how he was going to draw it, it went off and killed her and injured another. Law enforcement investigation shows more than 500 rounds of dummy, blank, and live ammo was on set. According to the LA Times, the crew member who handed Baldwin the gun, Dave Halls, did not check, quote, all of the rounds loaded in the weapon. No word if charges will be filed. And two more items have been dropped from Biden's Build Back Better spending package: family and medical paid leave, according to NBC. This comes after Democratic Senator Joe Manchin said that they shouldn't be guaranteeing paid leave as a social safety net and didn't think it should be part of the reconciliation bill. The White House said the president is open to compromise and said he knows he's not going to get everything he wants in each bill. And some good news for Astros fans. They beat the Braves in a 7-2 in Game 2 of the World Series yesterday. This after losing their first game Tuesday. Next game is tomorrow night in Atlanta, and it's expected to be a good one.
Should be a good one.
All right.
Well, listen, Sarah, tell everybody how they get to our show.
Yeah.
And give them all the coordinates. I think that's important.
Absolutely. So if you are trying to reach us on Facebook at To Be Frank Show, we also have, of course, on YouTube, just search the To Be Frank Show. Make sure you put show in there. And then online, tobefrankshow.com. And then, of course, we're on all of your streaming platforms, wherever you get your podcasts. So whether that's Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, we are on everything. So make sure that you can find us there.
All right. Well, that does it for this Thursday's show, Sarah. And we went a little bit longer, but I think it was important that, we covered the things that we covered. What I would suggest is, for everyone who watches the show, all this information that I give to you, it's out there. Don't get your information from watching these political shows. Go out there and do your own research, because the information is vastly different than what they're gaslighting you a lot of times, on these cable networks and on the national networks. And it's the main reason why we do the show. But, it was not a great day for the Biden presidency today. And given that it's not a great day for our country, I hope over the weekend and into early next week, we can get some sanity back somewhere in Washington and try to figure this out.
Yeah. Okay, I hope so. But also, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. You know, Frank broke down.
Send it to Sarah.
Send it to the page. Send it to the Facebook page, YouTube comments, whatever. But we'd love to hear from you, and especially if you have any questions or any subjects that you want Frank to break down or you want us to break down, we're happy to do that, and we want to deliver the news to what you want to hear and what you want to learn. So please send us a message.
All right. Well, we'll see y'all on Monday. Take care of your families. Take care of yourselves. Be safe. And we'll see you on Monday.
All right. See you then.